The gift of weakness. The empire of the aliens was vast and powerful. Their ships were unmatched in strength, their technology far beyond anything humans could even imagine. They had conquered galaxies, crushed civilizations, and held dominion over countless planets. They believed themselves to be the supreme force in the universe, and they thought humanity was just a fleeting species with no hope of survival against them. For centuries, the aliens watched humanity from afar. They saw humans fight wars, struggle to survive, and fail again and again to conquer the stars. But despite their failures, there was something that intrigued the aliens, something they couldn't understand. The humans never gave up. Even in the face of their weakest moments, they kept fighting. It was as if their spirit could never be broken. The aliens, in their arrogance, thought that they could end humanity's stubbornness with a single move. They decided to test humanity in the cruelest way possible. They would give humans the weakest ship, a vessel that was nothing more than a fragile shell. It was old, outdated, and riddled with flaws. The aliens believed that no one could survive in such a ship, especially not humans. They would give it to them and watch as they failed, just as they had predicted. The humans were unaware of the aliens' plans. On Earth, a small team of explorers was selected to receive the gift, or rather, the curse. These men and women had spent their entire lives dreaming of space travel, of reaching the stars and exploring the unknown. Little did they know that their journey would not be one of exploration, but one of survival against overwhelming odds. The aliens sent the ship, a sleek silver craft, to Earth. From the outside, it looked like a masterpiece, smooth curves, advanced design, and a promise of untold power. But the humans quickly realized that the ship was a mere shell, fragile and almost useless. The ship was held together by nothing more than the bare minimum of technology. There were no advanced shields, no defensive systems, and barely. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that humans didn't give up. They never had. And this time, they were determined to prove it to the universe. In that moment, the aliens realized they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And soon, they would learn that no matter how fragile the ship, the humans inside were anything but weak. The first test. As the fragile ship cut through the dark vacuum of space, the crew could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on them. They had no idea what was ahead. The alien gift, this weak, outdated vessel, was not just a test of their skills, it was a test of their survival. And the crew knew that if they failed, they wouldn't just be failing themselves, they would be failing humanity. Their first challenge came sooner than expected. The ship's sensors flickered to life, displaying a flashing red warning on the main console. A massive asteroid field lay ahead, stretching out like a dense cloud of rock and debris. The crew could see the jagged shapes floating in the dark, each one large enough to rip their ship to pieces. Captain Ellis stood up from his seat, eyes narrowed with focus. "Brace yourselves," he said, his voice calm, though his hands gripped the control panel tightly. "We're going through." The crew exchanged nervous looks. There was no turning back now. The asteroid field was impossible to navigate for a ship that was already falling apart. The humans had no shields to protect them, and the ship's hull was too thin to withstand a direct hit. It seemed like certain death. But as the ship drew closer to the field, the crew didn't panic. Instead, they sprang into action. Lieutenant Clara, the ship's navigator, quickly adjusted the flight path, guiding the ship through the narrowest gaps between the floating rocks. It was a delicate balance. One wrong move, and the ship would be smashed apart. But the humans were no strangers to danger, and they relied on their instincts and teamwork. The first asteroid passed close enough that the ship's hull scraped against it. A loud screech echoed through the ship, and everyone braced for impact. The crew heard the emergency alarms blare, but no damage was done. The ship held, despite the hit. "Hold steady," Captain Ellis shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. "We're almost through." The ship jerked violently as they dodged another asteroid, and this time, a chunk of the ship's side was torn away. Sparks flew from the damaged area, and the crew rushed to contain the breach. Despite the chaos, the humans kept their cool, working together to keep the ship from falling apart completely. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as the ship weaved through the asteroid field. Each twist and turn brought them closer to certain death, yet the humans refused to give in. They pushed the ship to its limits, using every ounce of skill they had. Then, just as it seemed they couldn't go any further, they broke through. The asteroid field ended, leaving only the emptiness of space ahead. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief. They had made it through the first test, barely. But as they floated in the quiet after the chaos, a feeling of unease settled over the crew. They had survived this trial, but what else would the aliens throw at them? If the ship couldn't withstand the smallest hit from the asteroids, what would happen next? The crew knew they could not relax. Not yet. The aliens, still watching from afar, were stunned. They had been certain the humans wouldn't make it through the asteroid field. The ship, so weak and fragile, should have been destroyed. And yet, the humans had found a way to survive. The aliens were beginning to realize that there was something about humanity they had not counted on. The humans' ability to adapt, to think on their feet, and to face impossible odds was unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. They had underestimated humanity, and that mistake was beginning to haunt them. Back on the ship, Captain Ellis turned to his crew, a determined look in his eyes. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice steady. "This was just the first of many tests. We need to keep going, no matter what happens. The universe is watching, and we have to show them what we're made of." With that, the crew tightened their grip on their duties. They knew the road ahead was filled with even greater dangers, but they also knew something the aliens didn't. Humanity never backs down, no matter how weak they are thought to be. The ship continued to drift through the dark expanse of space, and the crew braced themselves for whatever came next. The worst was far from over, but the humans were ready to face it, together. The unexpected ally. After surviving the first test, the crew of the fragile ship was battered but unbroken. The asteroid field had tested their resolve and their skills, but they had managed to overcome it. Yet, despite their success, something still felt off. The ship was barely holding together, its systems strained by the damage it had sustained. The crew knew that another test was coming, something even worse than the asteroid field. Captain Ellis stood at the command console, his brow furrowed as he analyzed the ship's systems. "We've got about 40% of our energy left," he said, his voice low. "We need to find a way to replenish it before we hit the next obstacle." "Captain, I think I found something," said Lieutenant Clara, her voice tinged with excitement. She had been studying the ship's systems, looking for anything that could help them survive. The ship was full of old technology, some of it alien, some of it human, but there was something unusual about one of the systems. "What is it?" Captain Ellis asked. His interest piqued. Clara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I don't think this ship was just built for survival. It was built for something else. There's an energy source hidden within the ship, something I've never seen before. I think it's a power core of some sort. If we can activate it, it might give us enough energy to keep going." The crew gathered around Clara as she worked to unlock the ship's hidden power core. It was a risky move. No one knew what the core could do or what would happen if they tried to activate it, but they had no other choice. If they didn't find a way to keep the ship running, they would never make it through the next test. With a deep breath, Clara entered a series of commands into the ship's console. The power core hummed to life, and a bright light flooded the control room. For a moment, the entire ship seemed to vibrate, as if it was waking up from a long slumber. The crew exchanged amazed glances, but their relief was short-lived. The ship's systems immediately began to change. The core wasn't just providing power, It was reorganizing the ship's internal mechanisms, rerouting energy to strengthen weak points in the hull and repair critical systems. It was as though the ship itself had a hidden intelligence, an unexpected ally that was now helping them. "This isn't possible," said Dr. Harris, the ship's engineer, who had been working furiously to keep the ship's engines functional. "It's like the ship is repairing itself." The crew watched in awe as the ship seemed to grow stronger before their eyes. The cracks in the hull sealed up, and the flickering lights stabilized. The strange alien technology embedded in the ship was doing something no one expected. It was saving them. "Is it sentient?" Lieutenant Clara asked, her voice full of wonder. Captain Ellis shook his head. "I don't know, but this changes everything. If the ship can do this, we may actually stand a chance." The crew marveled at the ship's sudden transformation. They had thought they were doomed, but now they had a renewed sense of hope. The ship, which had once seemed like a death trap, was now a powerful ally. The humans hadn't just survived the first test, they had unlocked something that could help them win. But as the crew celebrated their unexpected fortune, a chill ran down their spines. The aliens, still observing from their distant vantage point, had begun to notice the changes in the ship. What had once been a weak, fragile vessel was now far more capable than they had ever expected. The aliens' curiosity turned to concern. The humans were not behaving like the weak species they had anticipated. They were adapting, and they were doing it faster than the aliens could understand. This unexpected turn of events could mean trouble. If the humans were able to continue unlocking the ship's secrets, they might just become a real threat. Meanwhile, on the ship, the crew was preparing for the next challenge. They didn't know what lay ahead, but they had a feeling that the aliens' tests would only get harder from here. Yet despite the fear and uncertainty, the humans were more determined than ever. The unexpected ally, the ship's mysterious power core, had given them hope. And with that hope came the belief that they could defeat anything the aliens threw at them. "Let's keep moving forward," Captain Ellis said, rallying his crew. "We've survived the first test, and we found an ally in this ship. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The crew nodded in agreement, their confidence restored. They were no longer just passengers on a doomed ship, they were survivors. And now, they had the power to defy even the greatest odds. The aliens had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity. Soon, they would learn just how wrong they were. The ship powered forward into the unknown, its course set for whatever danger awaited them. And though the aliens watched from the shadows, they had no idea what they were about to face. The humans, with their resourcefulness and courage, had become a force that could shatter everything the aliens believed to be true. Defying expectations. As the ship continued its journey through the vast emptiness of space, the crew found themselves gaining confidence with each passing day. The alien ship, once considered a death trap, was now operating at full capacity, its internal systems stabilized and reinforced by the mysterious power core. The crew no longer saw themselves as mere passengers. They were pioneers, defying every expectation placed upon them. But despite their growing sense of hope, the crew knew the worst was yet to come. The aliens had been watching them, and it was clear that they would not let humanity's survival go unchallenged. Every test they had faced so far was just a precursor to something far more dangerous. Captain Ellis had no illusions about the road ahead. The aliens were not just testing them, they were trying to destroy them. And soon, the crew would face an even greater challenge. Their next mission came through a cryptic transmission from the aliens. The message was simple, but the implications were anything but. They were to travel to an alien world, a hostile planet where no one had ever survived. The aliens were confident that the humans would never make it through the planet's dangerous atmosphere, deadly creatures, and brutal conditions. This was a test that would be impossible to pass, even for a fully equipped ship. But the humans had no choice. They had to follow the orders, or they risked angering the alien empire. Lieutenant Clara scanned the data on the planet's atmosphere. "The readings are off the charts," she said, her voice tense. "The atmosphere is corrosive, the gravity is 5 times Earth's, and the surface is covered in dangerous creatures. This place isn't just uninhabitable, it's deadly." Dr. Harris, who had been the most skeptical of their chances from the beginning, couldn't hide his concern. "We don't stand a chance. No ship can withstand that kind of environment, not even with the repairs we've made." Captain Ellis, however, was unfazed. "We've already proven we can survive the impossible. This is just another challenge. If we make it through this, we'll prove to the aliens that we're not just a species they can dismiss." Despite the mounting dangers, the crew set their course for the alien planet. The fragile ship, now much stronger thanks to the mysterious core, slowly made its way toward the hostile world. The journey was long, and with each passing hour, the tension inside the ship grew. The crew had faced countless obstacles before, but none quite like this. As they approached the planet's orbit, the ship began to shake. The atmosphere was already beginning to affect the fragile vessel, the air growing thicker and more toxic. The ship's sensors were overwhelmed by the intensity of the environment, and alarms blared as the ship's systems began to fail. "We're losing control," shouted Lieutenant Clara as she tried to steady the ship. "The engines are overheating. We can't hold on much longer." Captain Ellis remained calm. "We don't have a choice. Push the ship to maximum power. We're getting through this." With the crew working furiously to keep the ship in one piece, they managed to break through the most dangerous part of the atmosphere. The pressure on the ship was immense, but they had reached a stable orbit above the planet. They had survived the impossible, just as they had before. But the real test had only just begun. They needed to descend to the planet's surface, where the most deadly creatures awaited. No one had ever attempted a landing here, and the risk of failure was unimaginable. But the humans, fueled by determination and the belief that they could survive, prepared for the descent. "Prepare for landing," Captain Ellis said, his voice filled with resolve. "This is it. We make it or we don't." The ship's engines roared to life once more as they began their descent. The crew was strapped in, their hearts racing, their minds focused entirely on the mission. As they plummeted toward the surface, the ship shuddered under the intense forces, but the humans refused to give up. They had made it past the first hurdle, the hostile atmosphere, but now they faced the real danger. The creatures of the planet were said to be massive, vicious, and relentless. Nothing had survived in this harsh environment, not even the most advanced alien species. Yet the humans, despite the odds, were ready to face whatever came next. The ship finally touched down on the rocky surface, and the crew was greeted by an eerie silence. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was thick in the air. But then, the ship's hatch opened, and the crew stepped onto the surface of the alien planet. They had made it. As they looked out over the barren landscape, the crew saw something they hadn't expected. Giant, shadowy figures in the distance, watching them. The creatures of the planet had seen them land, and now they were moving closer. Captain Ellis turned to his crew, a determined look on his face. "We've faced the impossible before. Now we face it again. Stick together, and we'll get through this." With weapons ready, the crew prepared to face the planet's deadly inhabitants. They had already defied the odds once, and they weren't about to stop now. The aliens watching from afar could only watch in disbelief as the humans, with their fragile ship and unyielding spirit, continued to survive against all expectations. This was no longer just a test. It was a battle for survival. And the humans were proving, beyond any doubt, that they could survive anything. A deadly betrayal. As the crew navigated the treacherous planet's surface, they knew that the dangers weren't just external. The alien creatures lurking in the shadows were terrifying. But what truly worried Captain Ellis was the ever-growing tension within the crew. Trust was vital to their survival, yet something in the air felt off. The strain of being constantly tested, the danger of the hostile planet, and the pressure of the aliens watching them. It was starting to break down the unity that had carried them through so much. The team had spent hours on the surface, scouting for any resources that might help them on their journey. Every step was a calculated risk, each move more dangerous than the last. The planet's creatures, massive, insect-like predators, stalked them from a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike. The crew had to move fast, gathering what they could while keeping one eye on the horizon, always watching for any signs of attack. But as they pressed forward, the growing anxiety began to affect their relationships. The once solid unity of the crew was cracking. Tensions flared over the smallest things, decisions, resources, who should take the lead. It wasn't long before whispers of doubt began to spread. Lieutenant Clara, who had been a steady hand in guiding the ship and making crucial decisions, had started to question Captain Ellis's leadership. The pressure was taking its toll on her, and she began to suggest that perhaps they should abandon the mission and head back to Earth. It was a voice of rebellion, and her concerns started to plant seeds of doubt in others. But Ellis, always the leader, refused to entertain the idea. He was resolute in his belief that they could succeed if they stayed united. Then came the moment that would change everything. As the crew prepared to move deeper into the planet's hostile environment, a sudden explosion rocked the air around them. The ground shook violently, and the ship's external communication systems flared to life with emergency signals. The crew scrambled for cover, their hearts racing as the ship's hull began to crack under the pressure of an unexpected attack. Something had gone terribly wrong. "Who did this?" Captain Ellis shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The answer came in the form of a cold, distant voice. One of the crew members, Lieutenant Anders, had betrayed them. He stepped forward, his face twisted in anger and fear. "We're not going to make it through this," he spat, his hands trembling as he pointed toward the ship. "We need to abandon the mission before it's too late. This ship was never going to survive. I've done what I had to do to make sure we don't all die out here." The crew stood in stunned silence, shock rippling through their ranks. Anders had sabotaged the ship's external systems, setting off a chain reaction that had damaged their only means of escape. In his mind, he believed that they were doomed, that the alien tests were too much for humanity to overcome. So, he had taken matters into his own hands, sabotaging their only hope of returning to safety. Captain Ellis's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he realized the full extent of the betrayal. "You endangered all of us," he said, his voice calm but filled with icy fury. "You put us all at risk for your own fears." Lieutenant Clara, who had been growing increasingly anxious about the mission, stepped forward, her face a mix of disbelief and anger. "How could you do this, Anders? We've all fought so hard to survive. We were working together. Now, you've thrown it all away." Anders' eyes flickered with guilt, but there was also a glint of something darker, something that suggested he had never truly believed in their success. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I couldn't live with the fear of dying here. I couldn't risk it. You were all blind to the truth. We were always going to fail." The rest of the crew was furious, but they knew they had to act quickly. The damage to the ship's external systems had put them in grave danger, and they could no longer afford to waste time arguing. Despite Anders' betrayal, the rest of the crew sprang into action. They worked together, focusing on repairing the damage to the ship and stabilizing the internal systems. Captain Ellis turned to the others, his voice steady and commanding. "We're not giving up. We've come this far. We'll make it through this together, no matter who tries to tear us apart." The crew quickly set aside their personal grievances. They had no choice but to pull together and survive. The alien planet's creatures were closing in, drawn by the sounds of the explosion, and the countdown to their survival had begun. With every second that passed, the threat grew stronger. As they worked tirelessly to repair the damage, Captain Ellis kept his eyes on Anders, who stood off to the side, his face clouded with guilt and fear. It was clear that the betrayal had left a wound within the crew, a wound that would not heal easily. But for now, survival was their only priority. They had to focus on the task at hand. The alien creatures were closing in, and there was no time to waste. Lieutenant Anders had betrayed them, but in that moment, he became another part of the crew's struggle, another obstacle to overcome. The humans knew that the biggest challenge wasn't the alien world, or the ship's fragility, or even the aliens watching from afar. The biggest challenge was their own unity. And with Anders's actions, that unity was fractured. But even fractured, the crew had proven time and time again that they could fight back. They would survive, not just because of their strength, but because they refused to give up, even when everything seemed to be against them. As they sealed the ship's hatch and prepared for the next phase of their journey, Captain Ellis spoke again, his voice filled with the unwavering resolve that had carried them this far. "We faced the impossible. Now we face it again. Let's finish this." And so, despite the betrayal, despite the damage, and despite the alien creatures closing in, the crew pressed forward. They would survive. They had to. And now, they had one final test to pass, one that would either prove their strength or destroy them completely, shattering the reality. The crew, now more fractured than ever, pushed forward with no time to spare. The sabotage by Lieutenant Anders had nearly cost them everything, but they had repaired what they could and were determined to survive. The alien planet's harsh landscape loomed ahead, its dangers now even more real. There was no time to dwell on the betrayal. The creatures of the planet were drawing closer, and the crew had no choice but to fight or perish. As Captain Ellis led the crew toward their ship, the threat of the alien predators still weighed heavily on their minds. The explosion had stirred something in the air, a ripple of change that seemed to echo through the planet's surface. The ground beneath them trembled as though the planet itself had begun to fight back. "Stay close," Captain Ellis ordered, his voice steady despite the growing sense of danger. "We're heading for the ship. Once we're inside, we'll have a chance to regroup and figure out our next move." The crew moved cautiously through the rugged terrain, their weapons ready, eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. The distant sound of growls and shrieks echoed from the darkness, a reminder that the predators were getting closer. The tension was thick, every step taken with a mix of fear and determination. They'd reached the ship's landing site, and the crew scrambled inside. The hatch closed behind them with a heavy thud, sealing out the world they had just left behind. Inside the ship, the crew quickly got to work, securing the hatch and checking the ship's systems. Despite the damage it had sustained, the ship was still functional, but barely. They needed to take off quickly if they were to escape the deadly creatures surrounding them. As the ship's engines powered up, the crew realized that their escape wasn't going to be easy. The ship was weak, its systems barely holding together. Even with the mysterious power core, the ship's performance was still far from optimal. But with the alien predators closing in and no other choice, they had to risk it. "Captain," Lieutenant Clara said, her voice filled with urgency, "we're going to need to make a quick ascent. If we take too long, we won't make it." "Do it," Ellis replied, his voice resolute. The engines roared to life, but just as they began to lift off, a massive creature lunged at the ship, its claws scraping across the hull. The crew could feel the ship shudder under the force of the impact. The alien creatures were relentless, and the humans knew that they were running out of time. "Hold on," Captain Ellis shouted as the ship shuddered again, this time with more force. The creature outside was trying to claw its way inside, its massive form pressing against the hull with terrifying strength. The ship began to lift off, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The alien creatures, now furious, were giving chase. The crew could see them through the small viewports, huge, monstrous figures racing across the planet's surface, trying to reach them before they escaped. The ship's engines roared, pushing forward with every ounce of power they had. But just as they thought they might escape, another explosion rattled the ship. The control panel flickered, and alarms began to blare. The ship's altitude was dropping, and they were headed toward a crash landing. "We're losing power," Dr. Harris cried out, his hands flying over the controls. "We've got to stabilize, or we won't make it." Captain Ellis clenched his fists. "We're not crashing. We've been through too much. We'll survive." With a final burst of effort, the crew managed to stabilize the ship just above the surface. They were no longer on the planet's surface, but they weren't safe yet. The ship was still at risk of failing, and the alien predators were closing in faster than ever. As the crew fought to keep the ship in the air, the aliens' watchers, still hidden in the shadows, were beginning to realize something. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were defying the impossible. What had once seemed like an easy test was now turning into something much more serious. The aliens could see the humans' determination, how they had overcome each challenge, each setback, and still kept pushing forward. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something more, something that could change the entire galaxy. The aliens, still watching from their distant vantage point, felt a growing sense of unease. They had underestimated humanity. They had thought that the fragile ship, the impossible odds, the constant tests would break the humans. But it hadn't. It was clear now. Humanity was capable of more than they had ever imagined. Captain Ellis and his crew, battered, tired, and broken, had shattered the reality that the aliens had created. Their survival was no longer a mere fluke. It was a statement. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could endure and triumph. As the ship struggled to maintain altitude, Captain Ellis turned to his crew, a grim determination in his eyes. "We've made it this far. We won't stop now. We're going to prove to the universe that no one, not even the most powerful aliens, can break us." The ship roared as it pushed forward, heading into the unknown. The crew had no idea what awaited them, but they had already proven something powerful. Humanity was not weak. They were a force that could not be underestimated, and no matter how fragile the ship, they would continue to shatter every expectation. They were far from finished, and the universe, whether it was ready or not, was about to learn what humanity was truly capable of. The ultimate victory. The crew of the fragile ship was battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they were still alive. After surviving the deadly alien planet, the betrayal within their ranks, and the relentless pursuit of alien creatures, they were now on the verge of something monumental. The alien empire, watching from afar, had seen their survival, but they hadn't seen the full extent of humanity's resolve. The humans had already shattered their expectations, but they were not done yet. The ship's engines hummed weakly as they soared through space. It was clear that the vessel was near its breaking point. Its systems were fragile, its power core nearly drained, but the humans aboard were not ready to give up. Not yet. Captain Ellis stood before his crew, looking out at the stars. "We've come too far to stop now," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've faced everything the aliens could throw at us. We've survived the impossible. Now we have one final step to take. We're going to their homeworld. We're going to show them who we are." Lieutenant Clara, her eyes still filled with the fire of defiance, nodded. "It's time. We've already proven they can't break us. Now, let's finish this." The crew prepared for what they knew would be their final challenge. The alien empire's homeworld was within their reach, but it was also a place heavily fortified, a place where the full power of the alien fleet was waiting. They knew they couldn't defeat the entire fleet, but they didn't need to. What they needed was to make a statement, to prove that humanity would never be cowed, no matter the odds. As the ship approached the alien homeworld, the crew watched as the massive fleet loomed ahead. Hundreds of alien ships, each larger and more powerful than their own, floated in space, guarding the planet. The odds were overwhelming, and it seemed impossible that a single damaged ship could make it through. But the humans were no longer afraid of the impossible. "Let's do this," Captain Ellis said, his voice unwavering. The crew activated the ship's remaining weapons, ready to defend themselves with everything they had left. The aliens had underestimated humanity, and now they would learn the true cost of that mistake. As they neared the alien fleet, the ship's sensors detected an incoming barrage of fire. A wave of alien ships surrounded them, and the battle began. The ship shook violently as they dodged and weaved through the alien fire, using every last bit of the ship's fragile power to stay alive. It was clear the aliens were not expecting such a determined, desperate fight from the humans. "We won't make it through this unless we push them off balance," Captain Ellis shouted. "Get ready for a maneuver that'll take us right through their defenses." The crew worked as one, every person moving with a single purpose. They powered up the ship's failing systems, using every ounce of energy to perform an evasive maneuver that allowed them to slip past the alien fleet. It wasn't perfect, and the ship took hits along the way, but they were through the outer defenses. The humans had breached the alien fleet's walls. "Now we hit them where it hurts," said Dr. Harris, his eyes focused as he worked the final adjustments to the ship's weapon systems. With the last of their energy, the crew aimed their weapon systems at the heart of the alien fleet, targeting their command vessel. It was a bold move, but it was the only move left. The ship launched a series of precise strikes, each one damaging the alien ship's critical systems. The aliens, still underestimating the humans' resolve, had not anticipated such a decisive strike. As the final shot hit its mark, the alien command vessel erupted in a brilliant explosion. The fleet, caught off guard, fell into chaos, their once impenetrable defenses crumbling in the face of humanity's defiance. The humans had done the impossible. They had not only survived the alien tests, but had struck back at the heart of their empire. The crew watched in awe as the alien fleet began to retreat. They had proven their point. The aliens, once so sure of their superiority, were now shaken to their core. The humans, with their fragile ship and unyielding spirit, had shown the universe that humanity could never be broken. The ship, battered but still intact, drifted away from the wreckage of the alien fleet. The crew, now exhausted and battered, allowed themselves a moment of quiet relief. They had won. Against all odds, they had shattered the aliens' reality and proven that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Captain Ellis turned to his crew, a tired smile crossing his face. "We did it. We've shown them who we are." The crew nodded, their faces filled with pride. They had faced the impossible, and they had come out victorious. They had proven to the alien empire and to the universe that no matter how weak or fragile humanity was thought to be, they would always rise above. The ship turned toward the stars, and though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy. The aliens had made their mistake in underestimating them. And now, the universe would never forget what humanity was capable of. The humans had shattered the reality the aliens had created, and in doing so, they had secured their place in the galaxy's future.